I believe that few people realized how diverse his interests were and how supportive he was of an incredibly broad spectrum of organizations. The peculiar arrangement between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, a marriage beloved globally yet characterized by extended periods of separation, has been the subject of decades of conjecture among royal observers. For years, they were trailed by rumors of tension, secrecy, and unspoken truths. However, now, everything has changed since Princess Anne came forth with a bombshell. She is finally revealing the true reason behind her father's unusual decision at the age of 74. It's also much more complicated than anyone ever thought. The reality is shocking, devastating, and completely unforgettable. The palace was astonished by Anne's revelation. When Princess Anne did speak, her comments were like glass breaking in a silent chamber, piercing decades of murmurs. She didn't hold back or use pretentious royal rhetoric. Rather, she revealed a reality that had long been concealed behind locked palace doors. It wasn't rejection, scandal, or even frigid detachment when her father chose to live apart from the queen. It was a matter of survival. Anne. She was frequently compared to her father because she possessed his directness, stubbornness, and refusal to give in to sentimentality. She saw Philip more clearly than any other of his children, as a man who had lived a life of compromise, not as a prince or the queen's consort. Her relationship with him was built on honesty rather than ceremony. His sarcasm was equaled only by her. See why he needed to make room in a world that had absorbed almost everything else he had, and chuckle at his lack of respect. When she came clean, it became evident that her father's withdrawal to Wood Farm was not a sign of the queen's desertion. Rather, it was a last act of liberation. She allegedly disclosed that he sought peace, and that cottage provided that. Philip discovered a spot away from the opulent corridors of Buckingham Palace where he could be himself, where he wasn't always watched by servants, and where he wasn't required to sit through countless ceremonies. Unfiltered, not protected. Finally, it's free. Anne clarified that most outsiders never comprehended this aspect of her father. The conclusion appeared icy, almost callous, to the general public. What sort of husband, after all, chose to live apart from his wife of 7 decades? The solution was obvious to Anne. For her, a spouse who had sacrificed all else. The monarchy had always asked more than it provided, and she was the best person to know this. To be by Elizabeth's side, Philip had given up his identity, his naval profession, and even his family name. He refused to allow the crown to engulf what was left of his independence. With an honesty that only she could get away with, Anne defended this decision. She saw her father finally pulling towards himself, while others saw a man pulling away from his wife. She informed anyone who could hear that it wasn't about leaving her. It has to do with remaining loyal to himself. Although the palace might have favored quiet, Anne's remarks changed the course of events. What had initially appeared to be remoteness suddenly took on the appearance of dedication. Because the foundation of the marriage was respect, which is more durable than proximity, it was able to withstand separation. However, Anne's strong defense was insufficient to quell the inquiries surrounding her father's choice. What else may be concealed beneath the surface of this peculiar arrangement if it wasn't a scandal, a betrayal, or some secret marital fracture? What reality, though, underlies Philip's need for solitude? The following revelation will bring you one step closer to the solution, so stay with us. The true reason for Philip's action was that he was never one to put up with needless bother, and to him, Buckingham Palace, the epicenter of royal life, became the personification of everything he didn't like. At one point, he said the expansive house seemed impersonal and frigid, more like a hospital than a house. It was more than a casual comment. They exposed the profound discomfort he experienced from living inside walls intended more for show than for comfort. Philip saw the palace as suffocating because he prized simplicity, directness, and privacy. The courtiers, aides, and staff who appeared to grow in number every year encircled the Duke of Edinburgh as he walked those gilded corridors for decades. Within Buckingham Palace, every moment of his existence was watched, recorded, and controlled by protocol. The palace refused to let him breathe, even when he was retired. He had no sensation of independence because of the never-ending procession of security guards, footmen, and formalities. Philip's greatest desire after a lifetime of public service was not grandeur but rather freedom. Wood Farm was the product of that release. It was the complete antithesis of the mansion, a humble house nestled on the Sandringham estate. Compact, silent, and devoid of ostentation, it provided Philip with the one thing he had been denied for the majority of his adult life: room to just live. There were no throngs of employees, no oppressive royal engagement routine, and no wary eyes waiting for an errand. He could read uninterrupted and wake up whenever he wanted at Wood Farm. Take long excursions around the countryside without anyone looming in the backdrop, and paint with watercolors. This was not an escape for rebellious reasons. It was a self-reclamation. For the crown, Philip had given up his name, his nationality, and his naval career. The only area he didn't have to make sacrifices again was Wood Farm. The cabin turned become his haven, and a reminder that peaceful simplicity was possible. Liberated from the incessant reverberation of footsteps in the marble corridors of Buckingham. And this is what Anne stressed. He wasn't trying to get away from the Queen. The goal was to escape the oppressive crown apparatus. Ever practical, Elizabeth knew it better than most. She encouraged her husband's escape since she knew the palace would never provide him with the tranquility he so well deserved. Wood Farm was more than a cottage to Philip. Freedom, in its purest form. There is still another question, though. Even in that peaceful area of Sandringham, did something much deeper plague Philip within the palace gates, or was he just fleeing from them? Watch this space to discover out. Philip's lifelong conflict between duty and obligation. The tension between duty and freedom wasn't merely a fleeting one for Prince Philip. It was the pivotal conflict in his life. When a promising naval career was abruptly cut short by fate in the early years of his marriage, the roots of his retreat were being sown long before he arrived into Wood Farm. Philip had joined the Royal Navy as an exceptionally talented and ambitious man. He wasn't your average cop. He flourished in the hard yet orderly setting of military life. He was a commandant. He found freedom, meaning, and a sense of self in the sea that his turbulent upbringing had frequently denied him. He was rapidly moving up the ranks by the late 1940s, gaining the respect of both superiors and peers. It appeared that he would have a bright career in the Navy, possibly even reaching the highest command. However, everything changed in 1952. Elizabeth took the throne at the young age of 25, following the untimely death of King George VI. The abrupt and permanent change in Philip's life coincided with her coronation. His naval career, which was the very thing that made him unique, ended all at once. He was supposed to stand calmly by his wife's side, rather than command ships. He was limited to a role with no authority, no blueprint, and no true purpose, rather than being able to choose his own destiny. The annoyance was instantaneous. Philip had to ceremoniously walk 2 steps behind the Queen in public, signifying the new reality. He had lost his independence. That one action meant a lot to Philip, who is a fiercely independent person. He was a leader by training. To take action or make a decision, he was now instructed to follow, support, and stay in the background. The issue of the royal family's name inflicted even another crushing blow, as if that weren't enough. Children typically inherit their father's last name, but Philip was denied that basic privilege. Lord Mountbatten, his uncle, had advocated for their name to be adopted by the royal family. In order to honor his position as Duke, Philip himself aspired to be named House of Edinburgh. Queen Mary and Winston Churchill, however, were adamant. Windsor would continue to be the name. Philip's response was abrasive and sour. He grumbled to friends that he was the only guy in Britain who was not permitted to give his children their own name, and that he was nothing more than a bloody amoeba. There was more to this than damaged pride. It was a crisis of identity. Philip had already given up his nationality, his Greek and Danish titles, and his bright future in the Navy. He was now denied even his family name. His independence had been gradually undermined by the monarchy, leaving him to play a ceremonial but meaningless position. He immersed himself in a number of causes over the year, seeking a feeling of purpose environmental work, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, and the modernization of the monarchy. However, no effort could completely take away the pain of being marginalized in his own life. It was obvious to Anne and everyone close to him. The years when duty stifled ambition and individuality was sacrificed at the altar of monarchy were the source of the dissatisfaction that eventually led him to seek seclusion at Wood Farm. He was a guy of action once. He was now ensnared in ritual, and even though he handled it with fortitude, he never lost his desire for independence. Decades later, was Philip's retreat only a matter of peace and age, or was it the long-awaited resolution to a conflict he had been engaged in since Elizabeth took the throne? Remain with us, a special link between father and daughter. Neither Andrew nor Charles were the ones who actually obtained Prince Philip. Anne was the one. Anne inherited his sharp wit, no-nonsense attitude, and refusal to put up with idiots. While his sons frequently fought with him or suffered under the pressure of royal expectations, his bluntness did not intimidate her. She matched it. Where Andrew courted indulgence and Charles sought acceptance, Anne provided Philip something more uncommon, someone who reflected his fire. Sincerity was the foundation of their relationship. Philip never had to hide his annoyances from Anne, or soften his statements to fit the palace's needs. She was aware of the burden he bore, while living under the watchful eye of the monarchy, and sympathized with his frustration at the incessant procedures that curtailed his freedom, sometimes half in jest, sometimes not. He informed her that being a king was like being a prisoner in a golden cage with velvet bars. Anne paid attention. Perhaps most crucially, she agreed without passing judgment, became the person Philip could confide in contrast to her brothers, who were either preoccupied with their own roles or sidetracked by scandal. She could see the tension of a man who had sacrificed too much, and she saw through the pageantry. She realized that his choice to leave for Wood Farm was a reclaiming of the freedom he had been denied, not an act of rebellion. For many years, and Anne never hesitated to stand up for him. In private, she resisted rumors that her father's withdrawal was an indication of marital disintegration. In public, her comments dispelled rumors. She brushed off the notion of treachery and reframed his action as the plain truth. He had earned the space he desired. Such remarks from Anne would have sounded defensive if they had come from anybody else. She had lived with his frustrations and saw his sacrifices, so they were weighty. Anne's devotion to her father was uncommon in a household where outward appearances frequently took precedence over inner feelings. He was not spared censure by her. She took it apart. She depicted a man whose retreat was one of survival rather than alienation, strength rather than weakness. Was Philip's retreat about a redesigned form of royal love or peace? Continue to observe. A redesigned marriage in which they live apart, yet still love each other. The notion seemed alarming to many outside the company. The Queen and her spouse were no longer living together after 70 years of marriage. For the general public, separation typically signified disintegration. However, it meant something completely different to Elizabeth and Philip. This was not a resentful distance. It was a reimagining of love. Strength was at the core of their unorthodox arrangement. Elizabeth recognized Philip's longing to be released from the oppressive burden of royal life better than anyone else. She had seen him give up one aspect of himself after another to serve the throne. In the line of duty, he had lost his identity, his naval career, and even his family name. She didn't object when it came time for him to decide to live outside the palace. She was in favor of it. No public statement could ever fully convey the impact of that silent act of understanding. The manner they loved was profoundly revealed by their choice. They demonstrated their bond without having to act together for the cameras. On the basis of respect rather than closeness, they had established a bond that was robust enough to endure and even flourish. Privacy itself became a rare and valuable kind of connection for a couple who were always under public scrutiny. The emotional bond between Philip and Elizabeth remained strong even while Philip lived at Wood Farm, and Elizabeth continued to live at Windsor or Buckingham Palace. Every day, sometimes more than once, they talked on the phone. As always, they confided in one another, laughed at personal jokes, and told each other about their day. These were not ceremonial calls, they served as lifelines. Behind the quiet of the castle walls, their unshakable bond remained invisible to the outside world. Additionally, their time together was devoid of royal opulence, whether it was in Sandringham, Windsor, or Balmoral. No official cameras, no ceremonial formalities, just a husband and wife sitting peacefully together, eating or remembering the past. These trips served as a reminder to their kids and grandkids that the quality of their relationship, rather than the quantity of time they spent together, was what really counted. Their unconventional living situation foreshadowed a more contemporary perspective on marriage in many respects. Many couples today realize that commitment and individualism can coexist, and that love doesn't always necessitate continual intimacy. In their culture, where the monarchy was still fixated on tradition, appearances, and fairy tale optics, this was revolutionary for Philip and Elizabeth. The Queen revealed a more profound reality when she decided to respect Philip's freedom. Possession is not necessary for a true partnership. It requires deference. It was best described by Princess Anne herself. She didn't find her parents' choice odd at all. It was useful. In her words, despite what the outside world believed, they were two individuals who had discovered what worked for them. And maybe that's why their romance lasted so long. The refusal to conform to external standards of what love ought to entail. They had been the quintessential royal couple for decades, walking hand in hand while serving their country and the Queen. Now that they were older, they decided on a model that was exclusively theirs. It wasn't failing to live apart. It was liberty. It was a silent recognition that Elizabeth had the wisdom to grant Philip his serenity after he had earned it through 70 years of sacrifice. However, this arrangement raised a troubling question for the public, even as it spoke of resiliency and trust. What did the years they were imprisoned in the palace mean, then, if distance made them stronger? Continue to observe the whispers, the rumors, and the reality. The tabloids jumped at the chance to report that Prince Philip had decided to live apart from the Queen. The longest royal union in history was shattered, and headlines cried out of marital unhappiness. Stories of frozen silences and concealed grudges developed from whispers. Not far behind was conjecture about other ladies, as is always the case with Philip. For a long time, Philip was portrayed as the great flirt of the monarchy. He was an easy target for gossip because of his quick wit, irreverent humor, and propensity to captivate people. Newspapers anxious to stir up controversy casually put names to him, from Hollywood stars to Russian ballerinas. It never mattered that there was no proof. Millions of copies were sold, based just on rumors. The press saw Philip's appeal as inextricably linked to mistrust. These kinds of stories became commonplace in royal reporting by the 1950s and 1960s. People would snicker if he went to a private luncheon. Whispers increased if he was spotted talking to a woman at a gala. Every social gesture made by the Duke of Edinburgh was examined, analyzed, and reframed as proof of adultery. He met a mysterious woman in a London flat, according to an anonymous report in one American newspaper. The palace categorically denied the tale, but readers devoured it. For his part, Philip frequently used scathing sarcasm to respond to the rumors. When questioned about alleged affairs, he once joked, but his scathing responses didn't really quell the rumor. His joking demeanor made him a likely suspect in the eyes of the public. He became a never-ending source of fodder for the tabloids. It was therefore almost unavoidable that many would read his retirement to Wood Farm in his later years as the end of a marriage that had always been plagued by rumor. The press couldn't help but be tempted by the story. A love tale gone sour, the queen in her palaces, and her spouse in self-imposed exile. Then Anne arrived. In contrast to the media's insatiable curiosity, Philip's daughter got right to the point. She rejected the rumors with the same directness that characterized her father, rather than with pretentious remarks. For her, the choice had nothing to do with betrayal, affairs, or strife. It has to do with sanity. He accepted the calm that he desired. Living nearby, Anne had witnessed the true tale. Her father was a guy who was exhausted by the strict palace life, strangled by the incessant ritual, and restless without autonomy. His action was an attempt to get away from the monarchy's apparatus rather than the queen. She also declined to spin that fact into a scandal, in contrast to the tabloids. There was more to her defense than just family ties. Credibility was the issue. Anne was the only one who understood his nature. She realized that he was human because of his irreverent humor, which was the very quality that gave rise to rumor. Though not always with ladies, he dabbled in life, and Anne responded with the clarity that only a daughter could provide when the media turned that spirit into rumors. Ultimately, Anne told one story while the whispers revealed another. An account of a man who was fleeing towards himself rather than his wife. However, the question that remains is this: how did the queen herself react to a marriage that now existed across two different homes if Philip's retreat was motivated by survival? Join us at Windsor for the epidemic reunion. While the queen bore the unrelenting burden of duty in London, Philip had spent years carving out his life at Wood Farm, satisfied in his solitude. Then 2020 arrived. The world ceased to exist. Public gatherings ceased, borders closed, and even the royalty was compelled to withdraw behind closed doors. Elizabeth and Philip unexpectedly found themselves sharing a roof once more, this time at Windsor Castle, after years of deciding to live apart. Although the reunion was unanticipated, it provided them with an experience they hadn't had in decades. Unbroken time spent together. They rediscovered what it was like to be husband and wife when they were freed from royal duties, without ceremonies, without never-ending processions of dignitaries, and without the incessant click of cameras. Their days were easy at Windsor. Without the employees who often occupied the dining rooms, they shared meals at the same table. They laughed together, the kind of laughter that comes naturally to two people who have known each other's peculiarities for almost 70 years. Even as his health started to deteriorate, Philip continued to make Elizabeth laugh with his witty, irreverent one-liners. In turn, she provided the constant serenity he had always relied upon, particularly in the face of an unpredictable and frightening outer world. In the most amazing way, their everyday routine became the norm. State visits were replaced by morning strolls in the gardens. Glistening banquets gave way to quiet evenings spent reading or solving puzzles. Normally in charge, the queen unexpectedly found herself endowed with the unique gift of time. Time to sit next to her husband, to take in his sardonic humor, to spend uninterrupted time with him. It felt like the world had finally calmed down to Philip's pace, who had long sought solace from the bustle of royal life. During this time, anyone who happened to catch a peek of them saw a clear softening of the couple's relationship. Prince Charles acknowledged that his parents' bond grew stronger during the lockdown, saying that their friendship appeared to have been revitalized. It was remarkable to the royal children to witness their parents, who were frequently separated by distance and responsibility, just enjoying each other as partners once more. Despite the pandemic's catastrophic effects on the world, Elizabeth and Philip received a gift they did not anticipate: the opportunity to go back to the straightforward life they had led together in Malta during their early marriage, before everything was changed by the crown. There were no conflicting roles or public expectations for the first time in decades, just the silent cadence of two people who had endured wars, scandals, and constant scrutiny together. This time at Windsor was the most accurate representation of their genuine selves to those closest to them. Elizabeth and Philip are husband and wife, bound by choice rather than circumstance, unlike the Queen and her consort, who are connected by obligation. Even though this reunion was heartwarming, it brought up a more pressing issue. How did Philip feel about his earlier choice to leave the palace life after rediscovering such intimacy in those last months? Continue to observe Anne's last thoughts about her father's decision. Princess Anne did not soften the edges or romanticize her father's escape to Wood Farm when she did finally talk about it. Her statement was unambiguous. It was Philip's final act of autonomy. In her opinion, his choice to live his life as he saw fit was an affirmation of the man he had always been, following a lifetime characterized by sacrifice, career, identity, and choice. Anne defined it as dignity rather than distance. She saw no negative connotations in her father's decision, despite what the press attempted to portray. It was a man recovering a small amount of autonomy that had been lost to him for the majority of his life, not a case of alienation or abandonment. His withdrawal served as a reminder that he had managed to breathe freely even in the opulent cage of kingship. Elizabeth's readiness to grant Philip his freedom, rather than just his insistence on it, was what made this arrangement noteworthy. Few marriages could survive such an unusual arrangement, but the Queen's approval revealed how deeply they were bonded. She didn't require his presence all the time to confirm their intimacy, knowing full well that their bond was based on unwavering trust rather than closeness. She instead offered him the space he most needed. Anne frequently thought about how her parents' relationship was never the idealized unity that the public desired. Perfection, or an enduring demonstration of unity, were not the goals. Respect was at issue, about making concessions and making sacrifices. They had carried duties neither of them had chosen, borne scrutiny, and survived storms. And despite everything, they had stayed partners, sometimes apart, but always on the same page. It was during Philip's last years that this link became most evident. The Queen found time to visit him at Sandringham, Balmoral, or Windsor, despite his solitary life at Wood Farm. The world had grown accustomed to large spectacles, but those quiet times were more important. There was never a moment of their separation. They had decided on the beat together. Anne's view of Philip's withdrawal became clear when he eventually died, in April 2021, at Windsor Castle, a few weeks before turning 100. She presented his latter years as a guy choosing to pass away according to his own wishes rather than as a sign of decline, away from the constant observation, in the peaceful simplicity he had so desperately sought, and near enough to the Queen to experience an intimacy unencumbered by formalities. According to Anne, her father's retreat was the final monument to a marriage rather than its dissolution. Together, they redefined what enduring love could look like in an institution based on appearances, and she accepted his independence. The chapter was finished with dignity by his passing, the dignity that resulted from two individuals who recognized that true love is about freedom rather than possession. What do you think then? Is Prince Philip's withdrawal a covert instance of royal sacrifice or his final act of independence? We want to know what you think. Remember to subscribe and like.